Is this the English village in Wales that should never have been built? The community that was condemned to the sea by the local council and then given a reprieve.
The intention of the local authority wasn't to scare people.
A place in the heart of an area that campaigns for Welsh independence. A village created as a playground for outsiders.
But to have done it the way they did was criminally cruel to the people of the village.
Is Fairborne safe for now, or will the sea have the final word? It's not even high tide now, it's going out. The waves are still crashing over these sea walls, and you can see in the distance those sand dunes. Behind those is Fairborne, and if it's crashing here like this, what is it actually like over there? Welcome to Beyond Borders. Rather like being the victim of a front-page libel that's followed much later by a tiny inside-page correction, Fairborne feels aggrieved. The Welsh coastal community was condemned by Gwynedd Council in 2016 as not worth saving because of rising sea levels. It was to be, as the council put it, decommissioned. In other words, destroyed. Property prices plummeted. People were frightened for their futures, but defiant.
If this was a sort of one-on-one, a private thing, then yes, you would be suing for some form of compensation.
Then, late last year, in a local newsletter, the man in charge of coastal plans for the same council wrote that he was aware of negative impact, significant revisions to climate change predictions. There are no current plans to decommission the village. But any mention of sorry? No. Just up the coast is Porthmadog, another place said to be in danger of flooding. Wales has its own parliament, the Senedd, that deals with purely Welsh matters, and in torrential rain we get the thoughts of the local member of that assembly on what Gwynedd Council did.
They could have avoided it if they had the science back 10 years ago, if they had a greater understanding and better modelling and better data, but they didn't.
So it wasn't ineptitude?
It wasn't ineptitude in any way at all. I wouldn't accuse them of ineptitude at all. It was a lack of sufficient data and correct data to come to the proper conclusion.
You see, a lot of people were telling them over the course of the last 10 years that they should change their mind, and this may be where the stubbornness and, if you like, ineptitude comes in, that they telling them that they should change their mind and they refused to until they were pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed.
Yeah, once an organisation like a local authority comes to decision, then they've got to map that out and they've got to cost it and work to that programme for a period of time, and that's what they did. And the evidence that was required still wasn't there for them. Now we've got more evidence coming forward.
But people were telling them the whole time the evidence is here, if only you look at it.
Yeah, and now we've got more evidence having come forward, and some local experts in the community have brought that evidence together and showed it in a meaningful way so that people can understand it and see it for themselves, and they can now look afresh.
Next stop, we're with Stuart Eaves on the edge of Fairborne, where the dunes meet the Mordach estuary.
Property values plummeted by 40% overnight. You couldn't get a mortgage. You couldn't get any equatorial release for old age pensioners. Yeah, no planning permission. But that's changed. It has now. We've ever since they've withdrawn we are going to knock your village down. You can now get mortgages although they want a 50% deposit, which is fair dues, I suppose. What happened when you couldn't get a mortgage? The age of the village went up because the only people who got the money is gold oldies. So they came down with their cash. What a lovely place to live. I know. Twilight of your years. It's nice and flat. You're safe. You can go out any time, day or night, not worry about it.
Well, unless you get flooded. I think that's the point some people were making, that they were trying to help, weren't they?
The council?
Yeah.
You're joking. They were intent on pulling the village down in any way possible. Did they pull Towyn, North Wales down when that got flooded? No, they rebuilt it. So if this village got flooded, why can't you rebuild that?
It's then a question of why was Fairborne singled out?
But you see, the thing is, if you say they weren't actually trying to help, what do you think they were trying to do?
We'll leave that to the imagination.
If on, you got your idea.
I have, but no, I really won't say it on camera. Let's just say that it's an English village.
It was a wealthy Manchester flour merchant, Arthur MacDougall, who bought the land that became Fairborne in the 1890s and built it as a seaside resort for his workers. It really shouldn't have been there at all, was one opinion in 2018.
I think it's fair to say, knowing what we know now, that a long-term settlement wouldn't have been built here.
Wikipedia says unusually the village has no Welsh name, just Fairborne, that most of its people have English backgrounds. As for moving people out of Fairborne to other parts of Wales, Lisa Goodyear, who was in charge of Gwynedd Council's plans for evacuating the village, was quoted in 2019 as saying,
"Do people want to receive people from Fairborne? Fairborne is unusual because it's an English-speaking community in the most Welsh county in the whole of Wales."
She's also one of those widely quoted as describing the people of Fairborne as the UK's first climate refugees. It's a phrase that infuriates the villagers. And then we hear from a lawyer who's lived in the area her whole life.
See, the thing is, it's been suggested that Fairborne has a reputation as an English village. It's not really part of Wales. It was owned by the Duke of Westminster. It was owned by the big flour manufacturer MacDougall's. They imported their workers. It wasn't really Welsh, and there's a certain resentment. You've heard all those stories.
Yeah, I heard the story. Yes, I've heard that. Yeah. Yes. I'm not sure. I think perhaps if it had been a more Welsh village, if there had been a lot more Welsh people living there, there might have been more fervent protests.
In summer, thousands still come here for holidays, climate tourists, if you like. And for more than 100 years, they've enjoyed the Fairborne Miniature Railway, with horses at first pulling carriages to the water's edge.
We have so many people come back year after year after year, and we develop a huge rapport with the holidaymakers that come back.
This is obviously, as we can see, very, very low down, right next to the highest sea level. If the water comes over, what happens to this?
What, to the railway itself?
Yeah.
The railway will stay, but the buildings and things will need an awful lot of work.
But if this is all sea, as somebody once...
Oh yes, then we can't run. We would completely be ended. That would be the end of the railway.
Everything's gone then, isn't it? And this is an integral part of where we are.
Very much so.
It sort of indicates holidays and the sort of romance of the steam age.
Absolutely.
They're saying it's going to go, or they did say that.
They did. We had to come up with alternative plans and try and work out how we were going to fund them at very short notice. So the railway spent a lot of time and a lot of effort looking at alternatives, and then we had various plans for where we could go. All of them very expensive, all of them very time consuming, and the time that was given to us is actually quite a short amount of time.
You should be on the other side, close to your baby, if you like, as opposed to me.
So that would have been the end of it here.
Yes, absolutely.
But not the end of the train, it would just have moved somewhere else.
Potentially, if we could have raised the money, if we could have had the time and the staff members to actually do it.
At its peak in the 1970s, it was carrying more than 70,000 passengers a year.
James, can we have one big toot on the engine as we say thank you to Harry?
With the Mordach estuary behind the miniature rail line and the main line taking passengers to next door Barmouth and beyond, this is all part of Snowdonia National Park, known as Eryri in Welsh. That's eagle. There is an old private toll bridge that gets you from one side of the estuary to the other, and it has an unfortunate history.
In 1966, a pleasure boat is coming from Bournemouth, was docking there where the steps are just outside the George. It was windy, and the tide comes in, and it comes in quite fast, and the tide lifted the boat, carried it to the bridge, and as it hit the leg of the bridge, it tipped, and everybody fell in.
And lost their lives.
Well,
this was, what, 15 people?
Yeah, and more fell in, but the barman and the landlord for the George at the time jumped in and managed to save.
Goodness me.
Save a good few. About 15 they managed to save.
You've been here a while now you've sold it up. Are you going to miss it?
Yes.
What are you going to miss about it? It's just a bridge.
Well, it becomes your life.
Yeah.
Because you're here each day, you get to know everybody, and it become part of the community, and it becomes a way of life, really, to be a toll keeper. And in the summer, you can see me usually painting the bridge. That's my job in the summer. So.
It's a beautiful spot, though, isn't it?
Well, it's quite nice to be painting, and you've got the sunshine and the breeze, and it's you couldn't be painting anywhere else, really, could you? Right. It's nice.
It's stunning. And it's been here how long, Sue?
1879 it was built.
Wow.
So.
Still looks solid.
Yeah, about 144 years old now.
And here comes somebody else. We better get out of the way.
Okay. Hi.
Looks good.
All done?
Well, you don't know, do you? You don't know if they paid
pay?
or not.
We find ourselves later in a Fairborne cafe with a Dutch student who is trying to find out for her master's degree what people believe will happen to their homes and their lives.
Would you say that the people you've spoken to here in Fairborne think their village, their way of life here, has a future?
Yes, I think so. A lot of people really love this place, think it's a magnificent place to live. And as for now, they don't really have any threat from the sea yet. So I think most of them are happy to live here for a long while.
So none of those you spoke to think they're going to get swamped?
No, I don't think so.
So what you read about the place and what you discovered when you came here, were they the same thing, or did you find that you'd been reading a lot of untruths?
Well, yeah, I had been reading some sort of narratives online that were perhaps not really what I found here. Because, for example, you can read some people saying that people here are climate refugees. Well, there are still a lot of people here and everyone's just living their lives, so it doesn't really match, in my opinion. But yeah, and also online you see a lot of focus on this whole definite year and decommissions plans, but when I talk to people here, there seems to be much more nuance and much more future perspective.
Our team bump into the man whose job it is to make people safe if there is an emergency.
Basically, there are about 8 or 9 flood wardens, so if it did happen, which I kept saying it wouldn't, but if it did, then basically we would be responsible for going round and informing people. We also have regular meetings to make sure people are prepared in case of a flood. I mean, at the end of the day, we do live next to the sea, so flooding is possible, but in 100 years it hasn't flooded in Fairborne. But to be right with everybody else and to do things properly, we did set up a flood warden scheme. We've never had to use the flood warden scheme.
And on why Fairborne was condemned, the silence is perhaps telling.
If I can answer it honestly, I think they wanted to get rid of Fairborne. I'm not going to say a lot of the village is purely English, but we do get classed as the Birmingham of Wales sometimes.
There appears to be a clear reluctance to say it. They, the council, don't like us.
Why, when it is good news, obviously, the commuting of a death sentence for Fairborne, if you like, are they seemingly so unwilling to share that with us? Why are we getting left messages like this?
Thank you very much for the offer of being on your television programme. We'll have to decline on this offer. Apologies for that. But it being such a political and quite a fiery subject to be discussed, we believe that it's best that we don't take part.
Gwynedd Council denies any suggestion of bias and goes on. We comply fully with the Equality Act 2010 and are committed to treating all people fairly and equitably. It emailed us that no formal policy decision has ever been made to decommission Fairborne. Perhaps the key word here is formal, because it won't say it will do everything it can to save Fairborne. And that leaves some residents in limbo, others phlegmatic.
A lot of people here, probably at my age, they're not young, there's not many young people here. It's a retirement place. So their investment's gone overnight. Simple as that. If it floods here, there is no compensation whatsoever. So you imagine, where do they live? Have to rent for the last twilight years maybe.
Well, for a start, they didn't say it's going to flood. They said they're going to stop maintaining the flood defenses in, what, 2045? Will I be here in 2045?
The council should look at themselves and say what?
Where did they get that information from? And realise this village will fight back.
So your view is that somebody somewhere decided that this place should be shut down so that it could be developed in another way?
Probably, yeah. Into something like a marina, or who knows. That's what I believe. And that's only what was said to me by locals 20 years ago. They've always wanted this place as a marina. So Farmer's got this little bit of a marina, and they probably wanted this place to be a marina. It's ideal. Knock most of the houses down, bring the sea in, build a new wall, build some nice luxury apartments or luxury houses, plenty of money in marina.
There's, I think it's 128 villages in the heart of England that are all under the same threat. So, what's the answer? If the sea rises, everything goes, doesn't it?
including one day perhaps the Palace of Westminster, built on a floodplain in London and said to be at high risk if the River Thames bursts its banks. It's here we meet the UK MP for Fairborne.
And I know that the people of Fairborne feel that their interests have not always been listened to.
Well, is that a fair thing to feel?
It's anyone living in a community where we're facing change happening at a speed which we don't know. It's completely understandable that people are anxious. But where I feel for Fairborne is that the world, including me as their representative, has pointed out that we are talking about Fairborne, and that has had an effect on those people there, where they quite rightly would say that there are other communities, we could well name London, huge conurbations which will be affected probably far more significantly, but that perhaps we're avoiding talking about that.
You know, one of the things that came across to us in our short time there, I have to say it wasn't very long at all, but we spoke to a number of people, was that they think they're being picked on because it's an English village.
I think that I understand why people feel that they are remote, but to bring in an English and Welsh question here is an utter distraction.
One other point that was left with me after we'd been to Fairborne was, if you talk to Liz Saville-Roberts, our MP, ask her when she's next coming to see us here in Fairborne.
When was I last in Fairborne?
But when were you last there? You were trying to remember.
I think I was there in the summer of 2021.
So nearly 2 years ago.
There will be... I've spoken to many people from Fairborne. I saw the County Council of Fairborne less than a week ago. Sorry, slightly more than a week ago. I am in regular contact with the people of Fairborne and always willing to speak to them.
After we finished, she remembers she actually did visit Fairborne last year. It's not the sea defences that have been breached, just a seasonal deluge that makes the golf course flood when we're out for a few holes with one of those behind plans for Fairborne's future.
I want to ask you about the council. They acted on what you say was bad information.
Yeah.
But it was 10 years before they said, actually, we may have acted on bad information.
Well, you know, it's very, very difficult to backtrack. It's difficult for a person to say, well, do you know what? I'm sorry, I was wrong. So imagine
but if they'd apologised, they might have saved people a lot of money, a lot of anxiety.
Certainly anxiety. And I think it was really a sort of pride thing, perhaps, where they thought, well, you know, we said this, and if we go back against it now, we're going to look like idiots.
Well, was it fair then to do what they did, or do they owe this village, this town, an apology?
I think they owe this village far more than an apology, personally.
But nothing has come, except for in other places. While we're here, we're told of a $120 million plan for new sea defences on the North Wales coast. The mainline railway bridge across the estuary is said to be having a $35 million upgrade. The area clearly has a future. There are ambitious plans for restarting gold mining in Dolgethglai, less than 15 kilometres away. Fairborne has been promised nothing past 2045. That is when they'll stop maintaining what protection the village has.
This really isn't a sea defence, it's just what they call a splash wall. If a wave hits it, bang, just not too much of it goes over the top. This shingle is the real sea defence. And they've got to check it the whole time to make sure that it's at the right angle. And look, let's go down. You'll see it's got a slope on it here. Another slope here. And the wave, the full force of the wave, is absorbed by this bank. They've constantly got to check that it's all okay.
But since one scientist said it would be far cheaper to save Fairborne than demolish it, there's growing enthusiasm locally for concrete blocks to be placed on the seabed to lessen the force of the waves. Villagers are reported as saying they'd pay for it themselves. It won't happen tomorrow. It may not happen at all. But Fairborne knows it is a long way from the end of the line. Climate refugees? Not us, they say.